Yeah, that as well.
Kia ora, I'm Fran, she, her.
And the affirming team.
Saad, first Fran, he, him.
Yeah.
I'm Luca, second and reply, and he, him.
I'm Shian, third, and she, her.
Awesome. And the Nick team.
Shona, Teresa, she, her.
Yeah, cover the E. Cover the Sanji, I, he, him, I'll be that.
Sweet. I'll just get this room set up.
Let's get this debate started. I now welcome the first speaker from the affirming team to present their team's case.
Over COVID, billionaires just got richer. Meanwhile, people suffered. People struggled with physical and mental health, and their cries for help went ignored because we simply didn't have enough money. We need to respond to these cries for help. We need a more progressive tax system to alleviate the suffering of New Zealanders and people around the world. What do we believe in today's debate? So would implement a progressive tax system. Please note, this would be a business progressive tax system as well. So the status quo, businesses have to pay a fat 33% rate. We would implement this there as well. So we would add another tax bracket to individuals. So the new bracket would be anything over $250,000 will be taxed at 40%. So how will this work? The NEC team is probably going to have a push that this that it's like difficult to implement. So why will the people that implement it be capable? Firstly, we already have a progressive tax system. Secondly, they know how it works. They know how to add another one. Thirdly, we just introduced another tax bracket. We don't think it's extremely difficult to add another one. Fourthly, there are many economists and like extremely smart people working for the government. They're very trained. We think they'd be able to push this easily. 4 points in today's debate. Firstly, principle on why everyone is entitled to a part of the collective wealth. Secondly, how progressive tax provides equity. Thirdly, why high earners don't need the money. Fourthly, how this reduces social tensions. Burden in today's debate. We need to prove that either we get greater net benefits on our side of the house, or the benefits to the underprivileged are more important than any harms to the super rich. Firstly, on why everyone is entitled to the collective wealth. Collective wealth is the wealth of our country in its entirety, and please note that it's like built on colonialism. The land and resources were pillaged by the Crown, by the UK, and we can by redistributing this wealth, we think we achieve like far more social equity, right? Because when the landed rich Pākehā are at the top and the lower like minorities, like the indigenous and Maori communities, tend to be at the bottom of like our economy, we think that's extremely harmful because of that colonialism that's already happened. The Crown already recognizes the grievances of Iwi. We just think this is an extension of this because these communities are the ones that are helped the most by this progressive tax system, because that's why we need more distribution. This policy redistributes wealth, we get more social services on side, it lifts up the lower class and it like strengthens the middle class, and even the individuals who aren't part of the exact groups that are suffering directly because of colonialism are like still entitled to some of this wealth because they're currently suffering as well because of these massive like capitalists who are taking all this wealth. We think that principally, regardless of any harms that negating things bring, we have a moral obligation to give these communities their fair share of this collective wealth, this wealth that has been ripped away from them in an extremely inequitable manner. Secondly, on how progressive tax provides equity. So how are New Zealand people suffering? Firstly, the housing crisis. Secondly, the cost of living crisis. Thirdly, huge amounts of storms, flooding. Fourthly, post-COVID buildback. Fifthly, mental health crisis. Like, please note, I can go on, but these are just some of the things that are extremely important. So how does this progressive tax fairly redistribute wealth? Firstly, this money is distributed to social services and infrastructure. What does this look like? It looks like, firstly, healthcare. We don't have enough workers. We need to train more professionals. There's a mental health crisis. People are suffering. They're not able to get help. Secondly, public transport. We think if we have better public transport, it's just going to be like far better for not only New Zealanders, but people who want to come here, tourists. Thirdly, education. The children are suffering, right? Our education is under immense stress. We have teacher strikes, huge amounts of absenteeism, like extremely low literacy rates, very harmful. Fourthly, we can like build sustainable energy with this money we're getting, extremely beneficial to our infrastructure. Secondly, on how the wealth of individuals, how these wealthy individuals have more than just money, right? They have social capital. This looks like connections, powerful family, right? They're able to afford these services, and these services are extremely good because they give power and stability to these individuals, like exempt from the wealth that they already have. We think that even if like some more money is taken away from them, they still have these intangible forces of wealth. And the people who don't have this are the lower and the middle class, the people who are struggling, because they need this money to make up for their lack of social capital that these rich capitalists have, who like own like huge amounts of money in this country. Thirdly, the IRD is capable of implementing this tax, right? The top 1% in like a recent study by the IRD found that they were only paying 5% of the tax, yet they own like massive amounts of wealth in this country, that we can give this some of this tax we're getting to the IRD to form tax committees to regulate this like extremely strictly. Right? Tax is used to make sure like we have decreases in tax evasion from the ultra wealthy. The IRD is capable for them. We have a blueprint from Scandinavia who does this already. They have high tax rates. Scandinavia is rich. They're one of the happiest countries in the world, largely because they have social equity because of this increased tax. So what does this increased money mean for like New Zealand that we're getting from this tax system? Progressive tax system. Firstly, investments in infrastructure. I've already told you why that's so positive, but what does it actually look like? It looks like public hospitals aren't like swamped by people because we can train more doctors, we can give money to these facilities. Poor people are going to be able to get the money easier, so good for the lower and middle class. Secondly, education. Low decile schools, we can fund them more. We can pay our teachers. Thirdly, sustainable energy. We can move away from fossil fuels, extremely beneficial on our side. Our worst case scenario is that we have a little bit more money, at least, even if you believe that like this isn't extremely feasible, we're still going to get at least a little bit, and they're still going to extremely beneficial projects. But in our best case, we get a significantly high amount of money because we're taxing the rich, we're revitalizing our economy. This is like massive utility for these lower and middle classes because of all the like analysis I've given you on how it increases our benefits our social services and infrastructure, and it makes the lower and middle class stronger. The comparative is all this money either sits in the pockets of these rich people, or even if they invest, please know that we live in a globalized, like neoliberal sort of economy. They're just going to invest overseas in like factories in China, factories in like overseas, and they're just going to like outsource all of this investments, and they're not keeping the money in New Zealand to fund these social services, to fund all the infrastructure we need. Yes, I'll take a PI.
Does the Speaker not think governments spend more wastefully, like on slushy machines in prisons?
Look, even we think that like this debate isn't in a vacuum, right? Like we think regardless of any money we're getting, they're still able to spend that on social services. You don't get that on your side of the house because these rich people aren't spending it on social services. They aren't building these hospitals. They aren't paying these schools. They're only like catering to like other rich people with these investments, if they are. Thirdly, on why high earners don't need the money, right? They're capitalists, they're business owners, they have rich families. There's a small number of them, but they hold massive amounts of wealth. So why don't they need this money? Firstly, lifestyle. When you earn above a certain amount, like you get less utility the more money you have. Like each dollar is simply worth less. You can already live a luxurious life, and you still get to keep a lot of their money on our side of the house. Secondly, like the privilege they have, I've talked to you about social capital. A lot of this wealth is inherited. They have these connections. They have wealth in terms of assets. They don't need this income. Thirdly, in terms of investments, like this kind of answers the POI, rich people invest in businesses, right? But sometimes they're not investing. That's incredibly harmful. And even if they are, these investments go to like, they're like not in a situation to understand the issues of these poorer classes because they often just invest in like private issues, right? Fourthly, like we're probably here to push about trickle-down economics, but please note a lot of these jobs, like Amazon, that the rich people have, are incredibly exploitative. They're paying like small amounts to their workers. Like they're not incredibly good jobs, and we think that we get far better outcomes when the government can fund projects like this. What are the outcomes of this point? How does like New Zealand benefit? What does this mean for rich people? Firstly, rich people aren't going to simply leave the country. We're probably going to hear a push down the line about this because of everything they've gained in this country, the connections to the places they're in, the social capital they have in this country. They don't come here for low tax. They haven't come here for low tax. We're already fairly egalitarian. They're unlikely to leave because of a high tax. It creates a richer country for them to stay in. Secondly, investments, right? We get investments in things that matter. The government has an interest in people, like the government isn't purely profit driven like these capitalists because they want votes. They want to do best for the country. Thank you.
now welcome the first speaker from the negating team to present their team's case.
I'm not sure if you all were at quiz night, but actually this year's budget was extremely helpful for the gamers and for the rich white men who don't now have to pay a prescription fee for their melatonin. We think that actually, dollar for dollar, the government spends the people's money less efficiently and less productively than the people spend the people's money. So, 3 things for you today. What does the private sector do with the capital they get? What does the government do with this capital when they earn it in tax? And then thirdly, what are the incentives that act on either side on individuals for like what risks they take and what businesses they start up? But first I'll start with some rebuttal. So we had a really massive push from the affirmative team about this entitlement to collective wealth and about how the underprivileged in society have an entitlement to like the wealth above. And while we agree that there is definitely like an equity problem in New Zealand and we have like a terrible cost of living crisis and that iwi and poor citizens are like terribly underprivileged, we don't actually think that the smart economists in the government are doing enough to support these people instead of just cutting 20% of tax for gaming developers or letting rich white men get their melatonin for free. We don't think that this is productive. We don't think that, no thank you, we don't think that dollar for dollar the government spends this money efficiently enough to help all the people that the affirmative side are talking about. They talk about the education system. They talk about the mental health system. They talk about all of these parts of New Zealand that are struggling, but they don't talk about how the government is going to get the money to them, why it hasn't started happening sooner, why teachers are striking because they're not getting paid enough. They have not addressed their mechanisms. We think that we saw quite little productive spending in last week's budget. We think this continues no matter how much you increase tax, and we think that the way the companies will spend this extra profit that we get on our side is actually much better for the poor citizens of this country. So that brings me on to my first point. What does the private sector do with capital? So the private sector affects everyone very deeply because everyone buys things. Everyone has to go to the supermarket and see the exorbitant cost of living. Everyone has to many people have to go to the private sector for healthcare, for Scots College education, right? We think actually everyone is affected by the private sector, and so this affects the impacts for this point. So the private sector has unique incentives: A, profit, and B, just having a bigger name on the market. So the private sector also has a unique mechanism to get to these incentives. This is just set up. They have a mechanism of competition. They need to have the lowest price so that people buy it, right? If you're at the supermarket and there's a $3.50 block of chocolate or a $3 block of chocolate, a consumer is almost always going to buy the $3 block of chocolate just because of that element of competitivity that we get in the private sector. So in this debate, the capital that the private sector makes is extremely important because of this profits flow on effects, right? Capital provides a means for innovation for companies. Companies always want to be lowering their prices, and the best way to do this is innovation for better production, more efficient technology, and investment in their services, which ultimately ends up with lower prices, which ends up with more people buying their products. This means that companies ultimately will do anything they can do to get lower prices, and lower prices are good for the people. What happens on their side when businesses don't have the option of using profit because they're being taxed so highly is that businesses instead lower their quality. They have no means to lower their prices other than to have worse quality products. This looks like, for these underprivileged people that the affirmative side are talking about, clothing that degrades after one wash, right? Food that is more processed with less healthy ingredients that ultimately ends in an obesity crisis. We think that material goods last for less time because businesses have to make them less quality to make any profit. And we think that this is exclusive because on our side, businesses can have profit and quality. People need and want quality, but under AF, the people have no choice but to buy bad quality products because these businesses are being taxed so highly that the only means that they have to make profit is by decreasing the quality. Under our side, because there is more capital for these businesses fight with each other to have the cheapest product by way of innovating for more efficiency in their businesses. This looks like supermarket groceries being better quality and a better price so that we reduce the cost of living crisis. This looks like the flow-on effects of people actually having a cheaper world to live in because the private sector is ultimately ending up with better prices for the people. It also looks like Elon Musk being able to increase the production of Teslas to meet demand, making electric vehicles more accessible. And this goes for all large luxury goods that have massive impacts on the economy. And before I move on to what the government spends the people's money on, I'll take a POI.
Yeah, so how does the private sector benefit public services like public schools and hospitals?
We actually think that the government has the means to benefit public schools and hospitals, and under either side of the house, they are not doing it. But under this side of the house, the people that go to public schools and hospitals also have to pay for exorbitant cost of living because the private sector has to ramp up their prices because they're not making any capital because they're being taxed so much. We think that maybe the 20% of profit that film developers are getting could maybe be going to the public school system, could maybe be paying teachers more, could maybe be paying nurses more. We think that the government is already making bad decisions. We don't think you change this. So what does the government spend the people's money on? Thank you for the leeway. Dollar for dollar, money in the hands of the government. I've said this already, gets spent less efficiently. We see that they continue to make bad decisions for the country because, the government has insane running costs. They have a lot of policy advisors that really don't need to be there. All right, so they have political pressures. They have the need to make popular decisions for the people, and yeah, they have a lot of running costs. So these political pressures look like the government wanting to give under 25s free public transport because that's what the people want, despite the fact that a lot of these under 25s are coming from very rich households and go to Scots College and don't need free public transport. And instead, we could maybe be putting this into helping iwi and helping poor people in our country. We see that the government makes bad decisions with their money. This does not change under the affirmative side of the house. They have political pressures. They must adhere to the government must adhere to what their party's policies are. This means that they must make decisions that will get them in next election. That is their incentive. Instead of profits, their incentive is to get in next election and get the most amount of seats and votes in the House. Therefore, they must sometimes make, or actually a lot of the time, according to the budget, must make bad decisions for the people that don't benefit the right people, that are letting rich white men get their melatonin for free. These are not good decisions. It does not change under the affirmative side of the house because the government has other incentives acting on them, unlike the affirmative team tries to tell you. So, thirdly, personal incentives. What is the ability for individuals to take risks under their side of the house? We see that they're taxed more. This means that they have less money in the bank, and this means that they have much less ability to take the leap, to start up that business, to create something incredible. For individuals, there is no means to innovate because they have no fallback in their bank accounts because they're being taxed at 40%. They have no incentive to work hard. They both can't take the risk because they have no money in their bank account, but also they don't even want, not no money, but less money under their side of the house. Importantly, less money. But they don't even want to take these risks anymore because profit incentives are never as large on their side of the house, meaning we get worse quality goods. We have fewer businesses existing. We have less competition in the market, which means worse outcomes for everyone affected by the economy. And everyone is affected by the economy. So the harms that the affirmative side of the house presents are just too large for us to accept them. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker, for that speech. And now welcome the second speaker from the affirming team to continue their team's case.
The fact that the top, 1% of people in this country own the majority of the wealth in this country is just completely unacceptable. Where did this wealth come from? It came from the colonization of our people, the exploitation of our land and our resources in this country. It came from taking direct advantage of these minority groups who now represent the majority of the lower class of the people who are vulnerable and suffering in this country. Where do we need to redistribute that wealth to? It needs to go to them. We think that principally, regardless of any harms that they can bring you, this was brought up at start, that this wealth deserves to be with the people who've been taken advantage of. 3 points in the speech. Firstly, a point of clash on why the government should have this money, why they're capable actors. Secondly, a point of clash of why rich people are not capable actors and they shouldn't have this money. Thirdly, a split point on how we reduce social tensions on our side of the house. So let's deal first with their points on our side about why the government shouldn't have this money, right? So what do they say here? They said that they're likely to see businesses lowering the quality of their products because somehow there's competition there because they can't afford it, right? Well, what do we think to that? We think that is completely incorrect. We think they're going to lower the price of their products rather than the quality. Why is that? Let's look at some of their incentives here. Firstly, backlash, right? We see that public don't only make decisions on their products based on price, they also take into account the quality of the products that they're buying, right? People don't want bad quality products. What do we think is going to happen if we see all of these extremely diabetic foods that we're hearing from negating? What do we think is going to happen if we see all of these poor quality single wash clothes that we see from affirming? We think people are going to rise up against these corporations. People are going to get mad. People are going to be you obviously have the capability to make better products because we've seen you make them in the past. They're going to hold them up to account. They're not going to buy those products. Because second incentive, as we heard from them, is competition, right? But competition is not just about price. Competition is also about quality, right? So we'll see some of these companies are going to be smart, right? They're not going to lower their prices, they're not going to lower their quality straight away. So we think that the people are not just going to buy the lower quality products, which is the same price. They're not going to buy those. They're going to continue to buy the products that are high quality for them, and that's competition, right? Now, oh look, these businesses that lower their quality, they're suffering because they're having to compete with other businesses who didn't lower their quality, right? Competition exists in more forms than just monetary, right? But thirdly, most importantly, is that we've had recent investigations as to what's causing a massive amounts of inflation in this country, and it shows that it's due to excess profits, right? People had excuses during COVID to say, look, we're not getting all the resources we want, the supply chains are low, we're going to raise our prices because, we're not getting all the food developed in, and everyone was able to raise their prices at the same time because everyone was suffering the same supply chain issues, right? But now what's happened is they haven't lowered their prices after that, now that the supply chains are back online, now that they're not suffering from that. And so what we're seeing, and we're seeing direct investigations into this, is we're seeing that they're making excess profits. This is terrible. They don't need these excess profits. They were able to run and function before they were making these excess profits. Now they're making all this profit that they don't need. So we see that they have the capacity to just lower the prices, stop making that much profits. And they were able to do that in the past. They ran well in the past. They were stable corporations in the past. We don't think this is going to change. But what are the government incentives here? The government's main incentive is the interest of the people, right? Firstly, let's deal with the fact, on their best case, if politicians are selfish, if they're not really serving the best interests of the people, right? They're not necessarily these uber high class at the same level as these top 1% rich people who are going to be mostly affected by the significant progressive tax, right? Sure, they're richer, maybe some of them are maybe richer than the majority, but look at someone like Jan Tinetti, right? Who worked as the principal of a really poor Maryvale primary. She experienced the direct impacts that this unfair wealth distribution had, she directly saw the impacts that child poverty has on the country. That gave her a direct incentive to want to care about those people. She doesn't care about the rich gamers that negating seems to think all the government is their main priority, right? We think politicians have incentives within themselves to want to care for the poor. But even if politicians are selfish, what do they really need? They need votes. And the majority of people in this country are the lower and that middle class. They are the people who this wealth needs to be distributed towards, right? That top 1%, there's no reason for the governments to cater towards those people because they're not going to get enough votes if they do so. They need votes to get into parliament. We think these votes are going to come from these poor people, so that they need to direct their prices there. So what do we say at the end of this point of clash? We say that we think the governments do have incentives. They do have quality. They have the best, most skilled people in this country. We told you they have good economics people. We told you they have the people and they have the incentives needed to be able to give this money to the right places. But why are rich people not going to give that money to the right places? Because they are selfish, right? We hear from them that they're investing in all these good things, right? First of all, let's just address it. Out of that top 1% of people, probably the majority of those people just keep their money in their back pockets. It just sits around. It just goes on their luxury lifestyles. So we think that the amount of people who are actually investing is quite small. But even those people who are investing, we think it's really dangerous that we're giving the power of where all these good investments to our country are going. We shouldn't be giving that power to the uber rich. They don't have the interests of the people at heart. They have their own interests at heart. They're not living the lives of the lower class. They don't know anything about how these people are lives. We ask, how does the government change spending to be more efficient on your side? They don't, right? The only way they can be more efficient on our side is because they have more money. They already don't have the money that they need to be funding all these projects, otherwise we wouldn't see the services suffering. This significant amount of money that they're getting can only go to good things, even if some of it is wasted on small things like benefits for gamers, right? Surely at least some of that money will go to the right places, otherwise the government wouldn't be voted in, right? Now, onto my split point. How do we reduce social tensions through this policy, right? There is more than just a monetary divide in this country. There's also a social tension barrier between the upper class and the rest of the population. I'll quickly take a bit away.
How does company lower their prices if they're being taxed at an insane level and are making very little profit?
We already told you they're making excess profit. If they lower their prices, they'll just make a bit less profit. They're still going to make some profit. Okay. So why is there this social barrier divide? Firstly, because the lower class are jealous of the upper class lifestyles. Secondly, because there's a misunderstanding of the pathways that lead to poverty from the upper class. Thirdly, because upper class directly exploit the poor to get richer. And fourthly, because there's frustration from the lower class that the rich aren't doing more to help them. So how does progressive tax alleviate this? Firstly, because the lower class get justice, right? They see that the rich are having their unnecessary wealth taken away from them. They feel like the government is finally being fair. They're less angry at these rich people who never have to sacrifice anything. Now they have to sacrifice a part of their wealth, right? But secondly, they see the impacts of where this money is going to. They'll see more investment into social services. Even if it's just promises, these promises at least give them hope that they're not being forgotten. But we don't think it's just promises. We think this money will be implemented correctly. We think this money, they'll directly experience this when they go to the healthcare system, their education, all of these different public services. This makes them less frustrated because they're happy that the rich are paying for their services. But thirdly, because rich people need to budget more, we told you that they have extravagant lifestyles, they might have to now regulate their spending a little bit more. This isn't really all that harmful to them, but what it does do is it helps them empathize with the lower class who have to budget every day, have to watch their money every day. What are the impacts of this? What does this mean for our country? It means that there's less hate, right? We don't have eat the rich. We don't have the rich people saying that the poor people are just dumb and lazy, right? This means we're going to see more care, more rich people incentivized to help out because they can feel the impacts, they can empathize with the poor, right? We see more cooperation. We don't see this polarization between the rich and poor in our country. We see a united front, and that's what we really need.
Thank you, speaker, for that speech. And now invite the second speaker from the gaming team to continue their
Look, it is simply not enough for the affirming team to say the system is unfair when they are actively reducing the quality of life of the people they aim to be advocating for. 3 questions in this debate. Firstly, how will the private sector spend the money when they've got it, right? Secondly, how will the government spend money, and then which of these is better at the end of that? And then thirdly, what are the effects on personal incentives and views? But firstly, a split around global philanthropy, right? We actually think that when billionaires billionaires are uniquely situated to be able to undertake global philanthropy efforts curing diseases across borders or or like being able to like, reduce like, water shortages across borders as well. This is because governments only have like incentives to help like explicitly the people within their countries, which means they are not going to be like, spending like money like outside of that, and are not going to be like taking the steps to make like really important like things that we think is like on our side of the house. We think like when Bill Gates is able to go and like, like be able to like make a whole bunch of difference like across a whole bunch of African countries because like he has that like beneficial incentive because he cares about people, right? We think that that like allows that allows like this global kind of like things which are really important, impact a whole lot of people in a lot of ways that governments simply do not like meet that like thing because they do not have the incentive to help people across borders. That is a huge benefit we get on our side of the house. Okay, so moving on to like the private sector, right? We like clearly told you that companies like compete with each other because they like if they don't like lower their prices or increase the quality of like goods for consumers will go to another company that does, right? We think that, we also told you that in uniquely having more capital, which the affirming side wants to take away, allows them to do this by allowing them to either like expand production to like, expand production to lower prices, or to like invest in technology to improve the quality of their goods, or to like improve like their manufacturing processes to lower prices in that way as well, right? We only heard two things back from them on this. One, that competition exists in many ways, such as like improving quality of goods or like prices. Yeah, we think that's true, which means that on our side we're going to get lower prices and better quality goods, right? We think that actually is really good for us. Secondly, they said, actually, we can currently see under the status quo. They asserted that we can see under the status quo that businesses are making more profit, right? But in their assertion, they actually admitted that the reason we saw businesses going up in terms of like raising their prices was because they were put under strain by supply, by their supply, which means that no businesses were able to go down. When the supply chain disappears, those companies will be able to will go down, or will go down, or the consumers will move to another company that does choose to lower their prices. But uniquely on our side, businesses will be able to build like the infrastructure within their businesses that will allow them to lower their prices because they have the capital to do that, to expand the thing, which they take away on their side of the house, which we don't see as important, right? The only other thing we heard is that like people tend to sit on money and not do anything with it. We think this is ridiculous because fundamentally like people want to like avoid and like natural inflation that occurs, so they're going to like invest their money in in businesses to ensure that they have the capital, right? We think this is good because it allows people that even wouldn't traditionally have the capital to be able to raise funds like through the stock market, or through like that kind of thing, and by raising it like investment from others, which allows them to start new businesses, introduce more competition, like develop new products, do new good things for consumers. We think that is really good. It also we think people will do this because it will allow them to make money, and also like more money on our side of the house. They're going to do it more because there's more room to make profit, and also because people will like be able to take more risk because they have like more money to like fall back on, which we actually think is something that is like really good on our side of the house as well. We didn't hear anything against this other than the fact that they don't want rich people like having like that power in society, but we tell you that we actually prefer there be investment at all. We don't care, we don't quite understand exactly why we don't want this, but we actually just think that having investment is really, really good, right? Okay, so at the end of this, what do when these private companies have capital? No, thank you. What do they do with it? They are able to expand to lower prices because they have to compete with other companies that will also have this increased amount of money on our side of the house. We think that's really good. We think that actively lowers prices for people. Very important because no matter what social services they're talking about, even in the best world where the government spends the most amount of money on social services, right, that will still affect not everybody in society, because not everybody accesses these social services, but literally everybody buys products, and so literally prices will go down for everyone. And we think this is especially beneficial for the people lower down as well, because no, thank you. Those are the people who are most struggling to buy the necessities which lower prices. So that's why we're absolutely happy to support that, right? We don't think the government will be able to do better than that, right? So what did we hear? So there's two questions for government spending now, right? like, are governments like willing to like, you know, spend money only in good ways, and are they able to spend money in only good ways? No, thank you. Firstly, we think that, you know, like there are degrees to which governments make bad decisions for political reasons, right? We think that when some policies like might be popular, right, and not actually the best decision, right? That we think when that happens, that's like particularly bad, and like people will like always like politicians will like mostly make those decisions. But even if they are able to are willing to make the best decisions, they are less well situated, no thank you, to make to be able to spend this money better, because to make the good decisions they have to spend money on developing huge amounts of analysis of what is actually the best way they're going to be able to spend their money, all these things like governmental running costs, which are inherent to the thing, which is wasting money, which doesn't happen when the private sector is able to do that instead on a risk model instead of one where they're spending money on that. Moving on, and then finally, what are the effects on people's? So, at the end of that, government spends money less. No, thank you. Able to spend money less badly, spend money badly, and also make bad decisions. And also, the private sector spends money really good in a good way. And now, I'll move on to effects on personal people. But I'll take you.
Yeah. So under the status quo, supermarkets are making record profits, yet charging insanely high prices. Does the lower class not struggle as a result?
Listen, we think that probably we simply give opportunity for businesses to reduce profits in reduce prices in general, right? We think that actually, what happens when you take even more money from supermarkets is they're going to be more to maintain things for their shareholders. Are going to be more taking profits in just to maintain that level of profit when you tax them more, as opposed to actually being able to keep prices lower. You're actually going to increase prices through that, even when you don't have competition. But we think you also just have competition generally all the time anyway, right? So for personal lives, we heard one main thing from the affirming team, which was general hope, empathy. Right? A, we think this is very low weight because it doesn't engage with the fact that people's lives will actively be getting worse. But secondly, we think that actually the personal incentives to go out and make money and work hard, and that thing that gets cheapened on your side of the house when you lose money is actually going to outweigh this, because it means that people won't be able to won't be able to see that as the valid way for them to progress. So what have we told you in today's debate? We've told you that fundamentally we're going to get better outcomes for consumers and everybody in society, which we think is absolutely the most important thing in this debate. Secondly, we told you that governments are unable and unwilling to spend money in positive ways, and that we get better personal incentives for people to take risks and to work harder, which we think is also something that's really important in this debate. And for that reason, very proud to negate.
The speaker for that speech, and now invite the third speaker of the affirming team to continue their discourse.
The main push from Neg in this debate was governments are reckless with spending, and the private sector, the rich people, know exactly what everyone needs, and they're the best people to be spending money. So, two main points of clash in this debate, and then I'll go into social tensions, which wasn't really responded to on their side. Right, first of all, how does the government spend their money? And second of all, how does the private sector get affected by significantly increasing the progression on tax rates? Right, first of all, government spending. Ned gave you this massive push on how government spending is reckless and that they're useless and they're just helping the rich white gainers. Alright? The thing is, the main thing here is that they're the only people who are spending money on healthcare. They're the only people who are spending money on education. If we don't give them this money, then it's not going to these sectors. Even if you do believe them and that they are somewhat reckless, putting slushy machines in prisons. These private sectors are not putting money into public health care, into public education. So any increased spending on our side in these sectors, which we prove to you, is beneficial, and it's more beneficial than these rich white gamers having a little less money. All right. That is why this is so important in this debate, is this government spending is the only way we're getting these benefits. And these are the benefits that we need for the people in our country. This is the benefits that we need. All right? Also, they tried to say that not everyone uses these facilities, except education, which is only funded by the government. It's not funded by these rich white people who have all the wealth. It is for the people. It is everyone uses these facilities. Everyone uses healthcare. Everyone goes into these things and uses these facilities, and this is what we need more funding in. All right. They also gave you a little push on how the government wastes money on analysing how to use this money. Except we need this analysis. We need to be making sure that we're spending the money in the right places. Because if we just leave it for the rich people, then they have no analysis. They put it into things that fail, and then we just lose that money. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go to helping the poor New Zealanders, the poor people in our country that we need to care about the most. Right? They also just gave you an assertion on how they're not spending the money in the right way. They gave you a few examples, but they're not actually mechanizing why the rich people are in a better position to have better spending habits than the government. The government has a budget. They have economists. They have people who decide what they're going to be spending money on. They decide which causes are the most important for them to be spending money on, both for the good of the people and for voters. Except you have to realize that the bottom, the poverty, the people in poverty, the people who have the least amount of money in this country are the majority of people. We have the majority of people who are relying on these facilities, and they are the people that can be voting this government in, which means that it is in the government's best interest to make sure that this money is going towards things like healthcare and education, because that is what the voters want. So, now that I've proved that the government is the best people to be spending this money, let's move on to how does the private sector get affected. But before I do that, I'll take point of information.
If the government is currently spending an amount of their money on administrative and friendly things, why is that better than having people be able to expand their businesses?
Okay, because they're not expanding their businesses, and this moves on to how the private sector gets affected. And so I'll quickly go into this. I'm just going to go straight into how private sector gets affected because it's pretty much entirely in it. So Ned gave you this entire push on competition and how these companies need to be able to keep these prices low, and that they need this profit to be able to expand and to keep taking risks. First of all, they aren't keeping their prices low. We've got record inflation, and it's not because of supply chain issues anymore. It's because the supermarkets are realizing, foodstuffs, Countdown, everyone is realizing we can just keep the prices high. There is no more competition because the competition is already high enough that even if they do lower their prices a little bit, it's not enough. Right? This competition isn't keeping the prices low because we're seeing that these prices are just getting higher because of inflation, and these aren't going towards it's just going straight to their profit margin. Their profit margin grew over COVID. They were making record profits in supermarkets. This entirely disproves their points about competitivity because there was none. There was no competitiveness because everyone was rising their prices. And when everyone rises their prices, there's no incentive to lower them. All right? These grocery stores are making billions of dollars off the money that people are working hard to be able to earn, to be able to buy their groceries. And so we need to make sure that we fund things like civil services, which allow kids in schools to be able to make sure that they have breakfast in the morning when they get to school, to be able to make sure that they're actually eating that day. We need to make sure that the people who we care about most in this country are actually getting this money. And they're not getting any of the profits that Countdown and Pack and Save are making. They're not seeing any of that profit margin because it's being drained straight from their bank accounts. Alright? Also, they did a push about how they need to be able to expand their businesses, which is where I'm going to respond to this POI. But we're not seeing them expand them in the country. We're seeing them expand their supply chain overseas. We're seeing them, instead of seeing more jobs in New Zealand, more money in New Zealand, we're seeing them export their supply chain to China, where it's cheaper, which means that they're expanding overseas, and we're not seeing any of that. We're not seeing any benefits from this, all right? So even if these companies do benefit a little from having more profit to expand, first of all, it doesn't matter to these New Zealanders because they're not seeing any of this. All right, they're just exporting it to other countries. They're pushing this profit out of the country. They're not providing jobs, and this is what's most important. Also, they try to say that this competitiveness helps keep prices low. And another point on that is that they're not giving us meaningful jobs. They're not providing meaningful jobs for New Zealanders. They're providing minimum wage, minimum benefits, and minimum security for these people who we need to care about the most. Alright, and now slightly on, they had a small thing about global philanthropy, but it doesn't really matter because again, they're taking this out of the country and they shouldn't have the power to decide which projects get funding. Because first of all, they're not actually earning this money, they're taking it directly from the profit, from the pockets of poor New Zealanders who need it more. They shouldn't have the power to decide. It should be these governments who are able to analyse these things, who are able to decide where it matters most, alright? And most of their money isn't actually spent overseas. It just sits in bank accounts pledged to these organisations so that they can avoid getting taxed on it. Right? If we're taxing them higher, that means that they might actually have to spend a little bit more money and actually use some of this to benefit people. Now, Luca gave you an entire split on social tensions about how we get less hate, more cooperation, and less divide between the rich and the poor, which is also a massive problem currently in the country. And this went entirely unresponded to on NEG. That is why we won this debate, and that is why we need to care the most about the poor New Zealanders who are breaking their backs for the system, and it is not helping them at all. Thank you.
Thank the speaker for that speech, and now the final substantive speech of the debate.
Cost of living payments, prescription fee reductions, discounts to gamers, and more. These are what governments spend their money on because it's what's perceived as popular, and that's what we've mechanised to you on SideNeg. The path that either team has to winning this debate is showing they improve the lives of people through lowering costs of things in their lives and making goods and services more accessible. We have two pathways we get to this on SideNeg and win today's debate. The first, we need to show you that dollar for dollar, private companies spend better than the government. Or we need to show you the loss of philanthropy and private risk-taking means massive harms on prices. So firstly, I'm going to go 3 points of clash. How do governments spend money? How do businesses spend money? And what is the effect on risk-taking and philanthropy? So let me start with how do governments spend money. Now, from SideF, we had this big push about how governments spend money on good things. Mental health, education, public transport, and we had this mechanised at their second speech. We had it supported by the idea it is what is popular. They want to do what is popular for their constituents so they continue to get votes. Now, we firstly highlighted to you the recent budget and the barriers that governments have to doing these kinds of policies you're trying to highlight. Firstly, really high operating costs, which we had them accept at third F. So I'm going to move on from that. We tell you ultimately what is perceived as popular isn't necessarily the most efficient to do. Let's take the cost of living payment, for example. It appears like a really good thing for poor communities, but it is not the most impactful things on actually solving issues of inflation. Indeed, what may appear popular and what may appear beneficial to the poorest communities may just be what gets votes. Similarly, again, removing prescription fee, it looks like you're giving poor people a reduction in fees, but they can go to Chemist Warehouse and get discounts on lower incomes anyway. Ultimately, what appears to appeal to the poorest in society is not necessarily what is best for this group. But we also tell you you've overestimated how much governments care about the poorest people. Honestly, in society, like the poorest in society are not like a massive proportion, and they're often like outweighed by other opinions. Often the middle class have a way more dominant voice, and the issues that still affect them, they don't get their reductions on prescription fees, and they are more likely to be able to afford grocery. So those kinds of policies, which are more directed to the middle class, who probably can get more away with affording groceries, are those that trump there. Now, we had a big push. So yeah, we tell you, the governments do what is popular, but to the wrong people, and even if it was to the right people, it's not necessarily the most thought-through thing to actually deal with the problem at its heart. We had a big push as well on like public services, how this is a big thing. But firstly, they've rolled under the assumption that more money equals these public services getting better. Like if we look at in real life, number of years we've increased funding to mental health, but mental health in New Zealand has not improved. There are some of these public services that the government is just throwing money at and not getting improvements at. Similar with the Greater Wellington Regional Council throwing more money at Metlink, and surprisingly, my bus still does not show up most mornings. But we also tell you these public services can be symmetrically funded on SINEG. Like there is still base tax income we get. We're not like getting rid of tax. That still means we can provide this really important base funding. But firstly, we tell you the private sector controls the most everyday things. When you sit down at the dinner table, you're not eating what the government gets you, in most countries at least. You're eating what you buy from the supermarkets and what you buy from the private industry. So the effects you feel there are more significant to your life than maybe like a bus ride. And they're like more widely impactful. So we also had another some info about like how the government has analysis, but we tell you like government often ignores analysis for like popularity of policies. The Labour government were told the cost of living policy is not a good idea of giving a lot of people money, but they still did it anyway. It's about political popularity. Both sides have agreed with that. So we think new policy analysts are often ignored, and they're often told like political popularity, I want to get voted in, that matters more. What we tell you at the end, governments, even if they have good incentives and we take them at their best, cannot spend money in the right place. They do have poor incentives, they need to get voted in, thus they do popular policy. Now, I'm moving on to my second point of push, relaying that first pathway of victory, showing you how businesses spend those dollars that would be increased in tax income better. So how do businesses spend money? So the context from side F, we had businesses aren't the best for people because they just want profit. Now, even though we believe this isn't true, I will take them at their best and accept this. So we tell you, actually, the price mechanism is both good for producers because the price mechanism controls their revenue and profit, but it is also what impacts consumers. So even the worst intentioned producer adjusting the price for their benefits also flows on impacts to consumers. We tell you a lot of substantive about this that has tried to be attacked, but I will more focus on their points. So they told us there wasn't much actually engagement under this point. There was a lot of assertive material about like New World's record profits, but we actually mechanised you ideas about competition, ideas about lower costs. So let me have a look at record profits. Ultimately, we think like supermarkets couldn't easily lower prices because the profit they make, since it's across such a large breadth, even if like they put that into lowering prices of goods, it would be like a 1 cent discount on everything. So that won't actually make much of a difference. On Z Fuel, when you go to the Z station, 0.5% of that goes to Z. So even if Z like forgo all their profits, it would only be a 0.5% price decrease. Meanwhile, if you increase their costs dramatically and give them so much more tax, they will have to pass it on. That is their only option. They cannot let it eat into their profits. So that's why we see like those kinds of scenarios where these big companies get record profits, because like even if they're willing to pass it on, we won't see it pays much of a difference in like prices for consumers. I'll accept that POI now.
How do we actually see this competitiveness play out in real life with these supermarkets and these gas stations putting up prices due to inflation and not coming down?
Simply because they have to. There is no way like Z can put down their prices when costs are so high. You are adding extra costs to them. You are making them force themselves, so they have to raise their prices higher because it's an additional cost tax. So we avoid that on our side and keep the lower price. Now, we also had some late analysis about like minimum wage jobs, but we ultimately tell you like low skill jobs that corporations will pay minimum wage will exist on either side. There'll still be people who like stock shelves, there'll still be waiters. Like we don't think that goes away on either side. So we tell you at the end of this, businesses, even if it's marginal, we still win. Businesses spend their money better dollar for dollar. Now I'm also going to do a bit of margin widening with the third point of clash. What is the effect on risk-taking and philanthropy, which we basically had zero engagement of. The only engagement under this point of clash we had is their split point about tensions. But we tell you tensions have a very minimal impact in society. And since we like benefit poor people on our side better, we think we reduce tensions better. So, where do we stand at this? Our points about personal risk-taking and philanthropy stand. That's our second pathway, and we win today's debate.
Thank the speaker for that speech, and now we reverse the order and hear the negating report.
AF pushed principle. AF pushed the principle that the wealth that sits at the top of the chain should be redistributed to the people at the lowest like rank in society, however you want to frame it, right? We disagree with like their mechanism for it just is more fair, right? Because we see that they don't get the same outcomes that they actually say they want. We see that how we actually should look at this debate is who gets the lowest living costs for the poor New Zealanders that we see today. Who gets the least pressures facing our society. It is not about the principle of wealth distribution. It is instead about flow-on effects. So let me just break this down for you. Firstly, we saw this whole debate revolve around how money gets distributed on either side. And we saw us mechanize to you very thoroughly, like level 1 economics, about how competition and like company expansion works, and how companies will lower their prices so that they get more buy-in from consumers, and how they're not able to do that under their side of the house, meaning we get higher prices or worse quality. We heard from Third AF that our biggest push was that the government spends badly. That was not our biggest push. Our biggest push was that like while the government spends badly, like companies have incentives to make profit, and while we think that probably PAMS New Zealand is not thinking directly about those in poverty, their incentives directly flow on to help those in need, because their incentive is to keep their prices low so that people will buy their products, and now you do not have to pay $6 for a jar of jam. So we think that while we've given you all these reasons for why government spending actually doesn't work out, and why we think that while we have this base tax, while we don't get rid of tax, the government should be redistributing their reprioritizing anyway, and we think that they just are not doing a very good job at it now, and their side is not going to fix that. While we think that as well, we also think that companies should not have to be under this pressure to either raise their prices or lower their quality because they've suddenly got this new pressure of extra tax, meaning they have less profit. We actually heard from Second F, it's alright, they'll just get a little bit less profit and that'll be okay. But no! We see that companies are extremely profit driven and they're going to do whatever they can do to keep their profit the same as it always has been. And when they have a new pressure of tax that either looks like raising their prices, as we heard perfectly mechanized from AF, that when there's a new pressure like COVID-19, every company raises their prices and then they don't have to get lower and then everyone has to pay more for gas, for groceries, for private healthcare, right? We heard that from them. We heard it from us too. They either have to raise their prices or they have to lower their quality, and we didn't get a big pushback from that. We heard people want better quality, but when we're talking about one of the stakeholders in this debate, which is extremely impoverished people in New Zealand, they can't afford to care about quality. When a company gives them bad quality products in the supermarkets, that's all they get. We told you that down the line. We told you the companies will do whatever they can do to make money. And under our side, doing that thing directly benefits the poor, the people in need of this country, because that thing is lowering prices, as opposed to on their side where it's lowering quality or raising prices. We think that if a company is taxed more, they will try to account for their loss in profit, and this will get to the benefits that AF pushes so strongly for by talking about the problems with the cost of living crisis and the problems with poverty in this country. We think that they try to push that the government has good incentives. We think they tried to push this principal point, and we think that they failed at this because what they aim for in this debate is an improvement to the status quo that is unachievable by their mechanisms. They want people to feel the pressures of the cost of living less. They want people to be less in poverty, and they cannot get that through raising tax on people that will just get that money somewhere else directly from the people, as opposed to the normal way. Thank you.
The speaker for that speech, and for the final speech of the debate, I invite the German reply speaker.
Negating's case has funneled down to a single path to victory, and that is proving that the private sector is going to raise their profits and unfairly target the poor people who can't pay for their prices. We dealt with this by proving that competition works on both sides and will prevent these companies from raising their profits to extortionate amounts, because then they can't compete with the other corporations. We won on the principle that giving this money to those who it was taken away from is what we need in this country, where these people have been historically exploited and historically taken advantage of. And that even if this money doesn't all go to these people, we principally need to try to give it to those who deserve it. So what do we hear? 2 points of clash. First of all, why the rich and the private sector spend their money less effectively, and secondly, why the government spends their money more effectively. They say competition means lower quality, higher prices. We say public backlash prevents this. Competition works on both sides. We tell you corporations compete in terms of prices and quality. So if some corporations drop their quality, they're not going to make enough money because people will just buy the stuff that with higher quality. We also tell you that people can't afford to pay high prices. So if everyone raises their prices so much, these corporations aren't going to get enough profits. So they're not going to raise their prices. Well, most importantly, we tell you that this money isn't going to come away from company expenses. It's going to come away from company profits. We told you they had the pathway through COVID to raise all of their prices at once. We told you that unfairly they didn't lower this. We told you that this led to excess profits. You don't need level 1 economics to understand this. We told you that companies are stable enough to cut those profits because they were stable enough running before COVID, right? We told you that from SARD, with all the cost of living crisis, with the housing crisis, with all these barriers that are facing people in our country today, we tell you that these companies, because they've already raised their prices at once, like in the first place, they don't have the capacity to do it again because people aren't going to be able to afford it. We tell you this at SARD. We tell you throughout the case, right? We've basically dealt with this, and the only possible way for companies to deal with this tax is to take off their profits, which they already have too much of right now. What else do they say here? They say that these rich and private people can spend their money on philanthropy, and that's really good. We tell you it's going to the wrong places. We tell you they spend it overseas. We tell you that these people don't know what the poor people need. They have their own agendas. The power shouldn't be given to them. It should be given to committees, to governments, to trained professionals, right? We tell you a split on social division, which was completely ignored. We tell you that this means that rich people empathize, rich people donate, rich people care more about the poor people in our country. We tell you that poor people are happier, they're less frustrated. This social division is a huge issue. What do we end with at the end of this point of clash? We prove to you that the rich people and the private sectors should not have the power to spend all of the money in this country. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the empathy, they don't have what they need to be able to spend this money correctly. So why is the government more able to spend this money effectively? They say the government spends it recklessly. Let's know that they didn't mechanize why they do so. They only just pick and choose two examples about the slushy in the budget where they just picked out the small mistakes among so many other helpful policies, right? What did we tell you? We tell you a lot of government MPs have personal stakes and they're not necessarily ever rich, but most importantly, they're voted in. We have a democracy. They're incentivized to help the population, and unlike what Negating wants to tell you, what the population will vote for is likely what they need most. They know that more than these politicians do, so the politicians are likely to listen to them, right? But thirdly, because they have these professional advisors, they're also likely to listen to these professional advisors because they're trained, they're professional, right? They're incentivized to help those in need, they're incentivized to help the vulnerable. Let's weigh this. At their best case, the government isn't all that reliable, but we hear no analysis on why they're any less reliable on our side. So they still get more, significantly more money. We don't have to prove the government's perfect, but we have proved that the government has more capacity now to fund those public services. In our worst case, we get some improvement, even if only 30 poor people are able to get healthcare that's so impactful to their lives. But in our best case, we get substantial investment, we get substantial gain to the poor, and we give that back the money to those who it was taken away from.
I think both teams for a fantastic debate. Now, I invite you to cross the floor and shake hands. And we can vacate the room while the judges make their decision.
It's not even just the third time, it's like third time in a row.
You look so dejected, man.
I hate this motion.
I think it was fun. I love being conservative.
I haven't taken any
was
commerce
like,
subjects, bro.
Oh my god.